But the neighborhood said, absolutely not. You can't have a coffee shop there. There'll be so much traffic and so much commotion. So these are the kinds of the battles we get into right in the middle of the city. I'm not talking about in the suburbs or on the edge. The feedback I get right in the middle of Minneapolis really led to the suburbs because they go, that's too much traffic by my house. A cul-de-sac will fix that. That commercial use is too close to me. Oh, good, we'll isolate the uses, we'll fix that. And so the suburbs really are very much of a rational response to the intuitive feelings of people. But so much of this work is really counterintuitive. One of the slides that wasn't shown today, and that I didn't bring either, but goes right to this question, and that is, if you look at these maps, and I think in Growing Cooler they exist, if you look at the CO2 emissions graphed on a map, the concentrations are the highest in the core, right in the center city. You look at another map that's right next to it, and the highest emissions per person are just the opposite, so out at the edge. So if I want to be an individual and take care of my family and provide them the cleanest air, I'm living out at the edge. If I want to care about my community and contribute to these solutions, I'm choosing to live in the core. So we have some really challenging issues to deal with as a community versus individual, and that many of these things are kind of counterintuitive as we deal with them. On a more positive note, the thinking is that we'll still see 50 to 70% of the development outside the core cities, in the suburbs and the smaller towns. And yet, and so it is critical that we begin to think about a new form of those places as well. There is going to be limited new single-family demand, as I mentioned, which will help us there. These regional development plans have transit corridors going out from the center city. The third rail line, for example, is going out to Southwest, out to Eden Prairie. And if we take the notion that our future demand is primarily 1- and 2-person households, and we need to do all this other stuff for good environmental and economic reasons, if we build out denser, walkable, beautiful places along those transit lines, we'll be able to serve the actual market that's there. If we build single-family houses away, we're going to be competing with the other single-family houses, 10 houses for one buyer. It's not going to be pretty. We're not going to solve these problems. So I think there's a real confluence between the planning thinking that's going on in the marketplace, huge obstacle of the rules that are in the way from my perspective. Redeveloping malls and office parks. Again, I think many of the single-family neighborhoods we've already seen established are going to stay. They're going to serve the single-family markets. We'll see redevelopment first along the transit lines. We'll see them at some of the malls. Belmar, I think it's belmar.com if you want to check it out, is one of the first and most progressive in the cities. It's in a first-ring suburb south of Denver, Lakewood. And they took what you think of as Southdale, if many of you are familiar with that, 1.5 million square feet on 80 acres. And they went from 1.5 million square feet of retail to 600,000 square feet of retail, so only 40% as much retail, but 2,000 housing units, a couple million square feet of office, a civic center, an ice rink, some theaters, a Whole Foods, a whole mixed-use new place on that same ground, because that ground for that mall turns out to be some of the best served in our region in terms of transportation corridors. And, in our crown jewel, Southdale, the first of the enclosed malls, is dying. It's been passed from one owner to the next. They can't figure out what to do with it. Sales are off, traffic's off. It's one of the most prime pieces of ground in the region. 25 years from now, that ought to be and will be, I believe, a bustling, mixed-use, connected, beautiful place and move away from its single-use deal. And as I mentioned, there aren't really mixed-use developers. My participation as a housing developer, I get calls from office developers and retail developers saying, the city wants me to do this mixed-use stuff, I don't know anything about that. Would you come and see if there's a housing market? And so I've gotten involved in some teams. I think we'll see more expertise develop over the next years in the development business, people that understand mixed use. It's really hard. The Urban Land Institute, which is one of the sponsors today and has some tremendous resources, their mixed-use development handbook. The first paragraph says there is tremendous opportunity in this area, and it's probably the most difficult kind of development to do. So, you have that combination, and it takes a goofball like me to like that kind of work. So, this infill is going to give us more transportation options. As I showed those projects that we've done in the city, what are we selling often? Well, we're trying to sell a new housing unit that hopefully is well designed. But what we're really, when people say, what are your amenities? Do you have a swimming pool or a gym? What we're selling is the coffee shop down the street, the theaters in the neighborhood, the park down the way, the lake, the urban amenities is our sort of package. So as developers, we don't typically do a lot in our buildings but we locate our buildings where there is an existing amenity package. One of the challenges as we begin to retrofit areas is a lot of times there's a promise of that before it's actually really delivered. One of the really encouraging things to me, though, thinking about sort of urban development, and urban, again, could happen in the core, on the edge, or in a village. It really has to do with the scale and the way that it's organized in urban form. Is that in urban development, when you add something, you're typically making it better. And most of the people are in pretty good agreement of that. Boy, that vacant lot's going to be a new restaurant? Oh, that's great. Or a grocery store. So the new pieces that are added in urban development are, again, in downtown St. Paul, where there were nobody to object, are generally more well received. In the suburbs, you think the original promise was the house in the landscape. So every new house actually degrades that promise. You move away from that promise. In urbanity, each piece that you add adds to the vitality. So there's a potentially much more positive dynamic in an urban development environment. It's interesting because I would say that many of us that have been working in the urban development would find that the environmental community has been one of our biggest problems. That the environmental community that took action 20 years ago or 25 years ago to protect natural lands and protect against the awful sprawling development have established some rules and regulations that now make it very difficult to do good urban development, stormwater management being one where we're very often asked to deal with all of our problems on our individual site. Well, urban development by definition is really a community plan. So our stormwater, our parking are often done for the whole area as opposed to individual by site. So there's a lot of regulations that have made it difficult. Those of us on the hopefully the leading edge of the land use want to think of ourselves as restoring the human habitat and join arms because we think we really actually have a very aligned agenda with the environmental community. And I'm not picking on any one group, but that has been an issue as we've needed to shift gears to, in addition to protecting the natural environment, figure out how we're going to do our built environment because we've done a pretty poor job with that. Just a quick thing from a marketing point of view. As a developer, what is Lander Group? Our mission is to improve the built environment, but we think of ourselves as a product development and marketing company, and we have to think up stuff that we can sell or lease to people and then and market it to them. And we think the high quality public realm has tremendous value. These images there are of great places around the country. You think when you go on vacation, you very often find yourself by hook and by crook in one of these places, a place where the buildings have created enclosure and there's excitement and activity. And we think that's a very attractive thing to a lot of our buyers that want to live or purchase a housing unit in an environment like that. And that most of you, even though you haven't been in real estate, have heard of the adage, location, location, location. We think the creation of the public realm, if you have a river or a lake, that's great, but if you don't, if you're starting with a scrap of land like at 50th in France, what do you got there? By creating a place, you can create some excitement and some attraction. So we think good design can actually create location. And all those urban infill benefits that the previous speakers have talked about. Just next steps, a few ideas to leave you with. I still would suggest we're back at the educate level. We're still not quite ready as a community to actually do this stuff. We talk about it a lot, but we're really not ready to act. We still go out to our neighborhoods and resist this stuff. Our rules back at our cities are still reflecting the last generation, not the next generation. So we really need to increase the motivation and the will and the desire. When we worked in St. Louis Park with the community there in a week-long charrette that became Excelsior and Grand, it was really interesting because on Sunday night when we presented the ideas, and we had 150 people from a broad section of the community get up and say, that's our plan. When the city people got back to work on Monday morning, they went, well, that's nice, but that plan doesn't conform with any of the rules we have. However, the will had been created during that week to say, well, I guess we'll change the rules. And that's what we need more of. We need to identify and support the aligned professionals. We need to actually, glad to see folks from the university here, we actually have a shortage of architects and engineers that really understand this stuff. So if you're a city or a developer that wants to seek help in this area, it's sometimes hard to find. So I think we want to do a better job of identifying. The Bay Area actually publishes a list of people. If you want planners or developers that really understand this stuff, go to these people. I don't know exactly how we do that, but we need to make them available. And then as you see projects, if you're involved in regulating your projects in your community, we've had situations where, we haven't been able to get the building we want or the site design that we want. We'll often drop back and if we can at least get a street and block pattern established. We have the public realm, we have redevelopment flexibility so that over time those blocks can redevelop. You think of so many of the patterns that we have out there now, they just do not lend themselves to redevelopment. So even if we don't get it this first time around, if we can set up the basic pattern so that it is easier to adapt, that would be a good step. Ensure transit ready. Again, when the high school in Bemidji moved out to the edge, there wasn't really any assumption that anybody was going to move there by the city bus. You know, so the siting of our public buildings, the way we set up our developments in this slide that I've